Привет, moi druzy. Hello, my friends. It's day 354 in the war in Ukraine. My name is Darren Gerdes. I'm a professor who's been tracking what's been going on since day 85 on YouTube, and then before that, I was tracking daily as I was updating a book about Zelensky. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about just a few topics. First, we're going to talk about the Russian offensive and why it's not getting traction, what's going on there. We'll talk about why Russians will not rise up. I don't believe, we'd like the people in Russia to rise up and overthrow Putin. It's not going to happen, and I'll try to explain why. And I think I have a key to understanding it a little bit more effectively. Same thing, why Ukrainians will not stop, because there's something different about the Ukrainians than there is about the Russians, and I'll try to unpack that. And then we'll look at 1 year ago today, and we'll try to understand where we were about 2 weeks out, a week and a half out from the invasion, and that'll be pretty interesting as well. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to start with the intelligence update of the Ministry of Defense in the UK. Over the past 2 weeks, Russia has likely suffered its highest rate of casualties since the first week of the invasion in Ukraine. That's remarkable. The highest week. Now, the new Russian offensive has just started, and it started in a weird way. It's like they're offensive is a defense. And what I mean by that is that they're just hitting those places where Ukrainians were, massing, like around Bakhmut or in Crimea or other places, instead of really having their own tactical aims. They're just reinforcing these places. It's a very strange thing to watch. The Ukrainian General Staff released daily statistics on Russian casualties, although defense intelligence cannot verify Ukraine's methodology. This is what's important. They're saying, we're not sure about the numbers, but the trends the data illustrate are likely accurate. That's been my contention all along. I don't know that the actual numbers are correct. They might be right. I don't know. But I think the trend lines are probably very telling. The mean average for the last 7 days was 824 casualties per day, over 4 times the rate reported in June and July. That is amazing. Ukraine also continues to suffer a high attrition rate. The uptick in Russian casualties is likely due to a range of factors, including lack of trained personnel, and that's what I was talking about yesterday, coordination, and resources from the front. This is exemplified by Volodar and Bakhmut. Okay, they also had this chart here. Daily average Russian casualty losses. Like, look at this. Right in the first week, it was first couple of weeks, it was actually pretty brutal. And right now, it's about as bad as it's ever been other than the first week. And that's really telling. I think there's something to this. If the raw numbers are not correct, the trend lines at least are. Okay, the Institute for the Study of War. Okay, now what's really fascinating is the Ukrainian military officials and Russian pro-war nationalists are on the same page. Like, how are they seeing the thing the same way? That's really interesting. Representative of the Ukrainian main military intelligence directorate stated that Russia does not have the resources necessary to launch large-scale offensive operation on February 24th to coincide with the anniversary of the invasion. Russian mill bloggers are upset about this very same kind of thing. They continue to be demoralized that the Kremlin's prospects for executing a major offensive are not very good. So it's really telling. Like they say, politics makes strange bedfellows. But so when you see certain people line up that otherwise wouldn't naturally line up, it's very interesting. The disparity between the limited but significant Russian advances in Bakhmut area and lack of meaningful advances elsewhere in Ukraine may support Millblogger and Ukrainian observations that Russian forces are unable to secure rapid advances through traditional mechanized maneuver warfare. So they're trying to actually get around this by having some special forces kind of stuff get into the city and create some havoc, but I haven't seen the fruit of that yet. Okay, another story. This is just to the side. Wagner Group financier Prigozhin is trying to salvage his declining influence in Russia as the Kremlin continues to sideline him and his mercenaries. He's not getting any more convicts. So he had up to 40,000 of his 50,000 men were convicts, and they have a very high attrition rate because they have very poor training. But he's not getting any more. He's been kind of cut off from that supply. Prigozhin falsely denied ever criticizing Russian conventional military. Well, it's very clear that he has, but I guess he thinks he can lie and just get away with it, but they're holding the grudge. The Kremlin is continuing to dim Prigozhin's star by depriving him of the right to recruit from prisons and targeting his influence in the information space. So good, let them have that infighting. I think that's great. Let's dilute their ability to raise manpower. Prigozhin is likely attempted to deflect attention from his controversies by undercutting the Kremlin's unrealistic goals for the war in Ukraine. So he's doing what Girkin was doing. Prigozhin forecasted that it would take Russian forces up to 2 years to reach Donetsk Oblast's administrative borders and 3 years to advance to the Dnipro River from the east. That's absolutely wild that he would say something like that. And it's very similar to what Girkin is saying, and how Girkin hasn't fallen out of a hotel window, I just don't understand. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the major topic here, and that is why I don't think that the Russians will rise up. Think about the mentality that the Russian people have. So there's this fascinating article. It was actually a few days ago in BBC News. Ukraine war, Belgorod locals live in fear, but they won't blame Putin. Why? They won't blame, they live in a system where you can't criticize the guy at the top, but all these other things are bad, and they're imbibing propaganda. And well, okay, so let's meet Raisa, R-A-I-S-A, Raisa. Let's call her Raisa. She's saying, no one will protect us, Rasha tells me. When people go home at night, they don't know if they'll still be in one piece in the morning. So she lives in Belgorod. She's in fear of those bad Ukrainians. Okay, everyone I speak to at the market tells me that they live in fear of Ukrainian shelling, but they omit to mention that it was their country that invaded Ukraine. Like, they won't come to that part. They confirm that 1 year ago, life here was quiet and peaceful, and yet they decline to join the dots and blame the Kremlin for what's transpired. Like, you know, they were forced into it. They didn't have a choice. They had to do something about these Nazis in Ukraine. We had to start this military operation, Russia insists. It's the right thing. We just should have been better prepared for it. We should have drafted people into the army right away. So many of our young men are dying. There'll be no one left for our women to marry. But I asked, what about the Ukrainians who have been killed because of Russia's invasion? Well, she says, yes, people on both sides have been killed, but the minds of Ukrainians have been altered. A new generation has grown up and they're hating Russians, and we need to re-educate them, to remake them. This is how Russians are thinking about stuff. Like, and I see this in multiple places. It's not just this one article, but the Russian mentality is so vastly different than the Ukrainian mentality. They have this kind of beat down, believing the propaganda, keep your head down and just be apolitical and you'll get by. There's a firewall, patriotic message, and messaging is feeding it. Staring down from billboards, you see images and slogans that encourage the public to rally around the flag. Well, you don't really need to encourage them to rally around the flag if you really have a desperate threat, as the Ukrainians have. They're rallying around the flag because they feel it in their bones. But in Russia, you have these propaganda posters like, thank you for your heroic deeds, reads one poster. For the motherland, declares another. Everything for the front line, everything for victory. Well, that sounds really familiar. So I went to Russian propaganda. Here is Wikipedia propaganda in the Soviet Union. That's almost exactly the slogan, everything for the front, right? From World War II, or from World War II. Okay, everything for the front line, everything for victory. Believe in yourself, but live for Russia. How about a big Z in the middle of town square? So that's kind of what's going on there. Now, they turn their attention to other people. In addition to the slogans on the street, there's also propaganda on Russian state TV. And if you go to RT and look at what they're saying, if you believed a fraction of what RT was saying, you'd have a very different perspective. From morning till night, the news bulletins and talk shows assure viewers that Russia is in the right, that Ukraine and the West are the aggressors, and that the conflict that is the very future of Russia is at stake. The messaging works. The West plays a negative role, talking about somebody else they're talking to, the owner of some shop. The West is playing a very negative role, he tells me. It obviously wants to destroy Russia. We've seen that before under Adolf Hitler, right? So the messaging is getting through, and so they're just buying it. They're not in any way primed to rise up against the state. And there's more of a reason for that I'll get into in just a moment. Ukraine is a Western puppet, says this other person, a law student, and the West has always wanted to destroy Russia. Hitler wanted to grab our land. Who doesn't? We have such an enormous country. Okay, the West wasn't even thinking about you. We just weren't that into you, Russia, this time last year. But now that you've invaded your neighbor, we have to do something about it. But this time last year, we weren't interested. Okay. I don't believe I can influence the situation, says Ivan, another person further up the street. I understand which country I'm living in and what the authorities have done to prevent ordinary people from expressing their opinions. Any such expression is dangerous. Wow. So even somebody who understands what's going on isn't willing to do it because I can get in a lot of trouble here, and I can, yeah. Okay, references to Hitler are not accidental. You hear them all the time on Russian TV to spark patriotic fervor and boost public support for the special military operation. The Kremlin paints the war in Ukraine in similar colors as World War II, as Russia fighting fascism. Russia is fascist. Like, you have to understand what's actually going on. It is what Putin is doing is the definition of fascist. Like, you can quibble about whether it's more communist or more fascist, but it's basically the same kind of thing. By the way, Hitler and Stalin were just competitors doing the same thing under different flags, but Russia is becoming increasingly more authoritarian and fascist, battling to defend the motherland from foreign invaders. Okay, and then a little bit further, a year of war and fierce Ukrainian resistance suggests the opposite, that now, more than at any other time in its post-Soviet history, the Ukrainian people value their sovereignty and independence, and they are determined not to be forced back into Moscow's orbit. That's exactly right. If Putin was trying to unite the countries, he did everything exactly the opposite of what he intended. Like, if he's trying to bring Ukraine back into their orbit, he's pushed them further apart. If he's trying to keep NATO further away, he's just got Finland and Sweden that are wanting to become part of NATO. So it's a territory larger than Ukraine. Like, come on, really? I mean, it's been very bad. Okay, last thing. Russia didn't provoke this war, Olga tells me. This is Olga up here, right? And they're telling her story. They're telling multiple people's story. Russia didn't provoke this war. A Russian will give you the shirt off his back. Russia didn't attack Ukraine. Russians are peace-loving and generous. Like, they really think that this is how they are. And you can't convince them otherwise. Now, what's really interesting about this is, the one that really grabbed me the most was, I don't believe I can influence the situation, says Ivan. And so I'm in class. I'm actually preparing for class the other day. I'm using this book, Leadership Theory and Practice. It's in its 9th edition. I've been teaching, or was exposed to it first, and I think it's 3rd or 4th edition. I've been teaching this stuff for years. This is just basic leadership theory stuff. But something jumped out at me the other day that I didn't see last time I taught it. We're talking about followership. And they're going through a number of different typologies of followership. Okay, so you know what leaders are, right? And leaders have a outsized influence, but followers actually influence the leader in some way. So there are several different typologies of how we think about what leaders do. And so Kellerman has this follower typology that you're low level of being engaged all the way to a very high level of engagement. And that's how they kind of understand what followers do. But listen to this, isolates. Number one, down here, isolates. Isolates are completely unengaged. They're just, I'm just not involved at all. The next level up is bystanders. Bystanders are observers who do not participate. They are aware of the leader's intentions and actions, but they deliberately choose not to become involved. Are you hearing how the Russian mentality is working? They're just like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not involved. I mean, whatever they're doing, that's fine. Participants are particularly engaged individuals who are willing to take a stand on issues. There's not a lot of participants running around in Russia right now. So you have isolates and bystanders. The population has been beaten down into this kind of group. And so there's not, in my estimation, any likelihood that the people are going to rise up and overthrow Putin. I don't see that happening. I could be proven wrong. I mean, I've been wrong about other things, but I'm telling you everything that I understand about leadership is telling me I don't see that happening, at least not anytime soon. Now let's go on to the next page and talk about this. Activists. Activists feel strongly about the leader and the leader's policies, and they're determined to act on their own beliefs, and they're the change agents. These are the people who are like, yeah, let's go make this thing happen, whatever that is. You find activists in Ukraine. You don't find them in Russia. You find people that are supporting, like, and I'll show you some examples of that in just a little bit. Then you have diehards. Diehards, they are deeply committed to supporting the leader or opposing the leader. Diehards are totally dedicated to their cause, even willing to risk their lives for it. Yeah, I mean, again, this is Ukraine. So if we look at that spectrum, we see that isolates and bystanders are largely the Russian population, and activists and diehards are taking up arms against the threat that is coming into their country in Ukraine. So I think that's a little bit of what's going on to help you understand, like, the followers of each country. Now, Zelensky is a great leader. Putin is kind of a lackluster leader, and what I mean by that is he's done a lot of things wrong, but the thing that's giving him the power is that there's this authoritarian culture that allows him to be in charge, and people are like, yeah, sure, you're in charge. And that's what the followers are allowing them to do. So that's why Putin has the power or hold that he has. Let me shift gears here and talk about this. Yesterday I talked about the Kokova Reservoir water issue, and somebody, I got a number of comments, but somebody had a really good comment. This is Stefan Sorensen, 2155. Kokova Reservoir water is used for cooling Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, irrigation for approximately 500,000 acres of farmland, and drinking water for many people. So it is Gerasimov doctrine. I talked about this a long time ago. The 4-to-1 non-military to military. It's the Gerasimov doctrine and pure terror against the civilian population. So look, your nuclear plant's going to melt down. You're going to run out of drinking water. We're not going to be able to irrigate our crops. That's exactly what's going on. It's inflicting this terror on the population. Good on you for recognizing the connection to the Gerasimov doctrine, because I didn't say that. I was just kind of scratching my head going like, why are they draining it? Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, let's turn our attention to what happened 1 year ago today. Latest on Ukraine and Russian tensions. This was really insightful. Ukraine's foreign ministry urges calm and says its forces are ready to repel. Ukraine Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Saturday continued to urge its citizens to remain calm and affirmed its strong position against Russia. So they understood that there was a legitimate threat right across the border, and they're trying to calm the population. Right now, it's critical to remain calm, stay united and consolidated within the country, and refrain from actions that undermine stability and so panic, said the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And so they're understanding that there's a legitimate problem. But the next article down said this: Russia may be on the brink of war. In Moscow, you might not know it. Like, they're not even paying attention to what's going on in Moscow. Well, I mean, obviously the leaders are, but the people are blissfully unaware. Read most headlines coming out of the West and Ukraine, and the situation looks dire. But in Moscow, it's still possible to get a late booking at the Swiss Cafe Pushkin. But in the glittering disco ball that is Russia's capital city, the geopolitical drama feels like an illusion. Russia hardly seems to be on a war footing, at least as far as the public discussion goes. And that was intentional, because what Putin was trying to do was say, there's just a special military operation, nothing to see here, you don't have to worry about it, right? And remember, what are the isolates doing? The isolates are just going, oh, yeah, nothing to see here. I'm not worried about it. Yeah, do what you're going to do. And that's what happened. Okay, another article. Ukraine crisis. Kremlin denounces U.S. peak hysteria. So here, President Biden was clear that if Russia undertakes a further invasion of Ukraine, the United States, together with our allies and partners, will respond decisively and impose swift and severe cost on Russia. I don't think at this point it mattered anymore. I think Putin had already made his decision. He's waiting for the Olympics to end so that he can not offend China, where the Olympics were, and invade Ukraine. He's already decided that, as far as I understand, on this day 1 year ago. Biden tells Putin Ukraine invasion would bring decisive response. We just read that little clip. The West would respond decisively to any invasion of Ukraine, adding such a step would produce widespread suffering and isolate Moscow. It certainly is isolated Moscow and spread widespread suffering in Ukraine. The latest effort to manage growing hostility. The two men spoke by phone for an hour. Again, it's pointless. I think Putin has already mentally crossed the Rubicon. Moscow had dismissed those warnings as hysteria. Really? I mean, you're lying from the start. The U.S. State Department ordered most of its embassy staff to leave Ukraine. The Pentagon said it was withdrawing about 150 military trainers. Now, that's really interesting. So the U.S. had military trainers getting them prepared for just what was about to come down the pike, which probably helps us understand why you had this big spike. Like, if you're looking at this chart over here, like, why did you have this big spike right away? Well, the Ukrainians were prepared for things about to come over the border. Now, not fully prepared, but they were prepared enough, and there were military trainers that were being pulled out of Ukraine at that time. After Macron's call with Putin, a French presidency official said that there were no indicators from what Putin told Macron that Russia is preparing an offensive against Ukraine. Nevertheless, we are extremely vigilant and alert to the Russian military posture in order to avoid the worst, the French official said. The French were like really a little bit in la-la land about, what they thought that that Macron heard from Putin. In Kyiv, several thousand Ukrainians filed through the center of the city, chanting "Glory to Ukraine" and carrying banners that said, "Ukrainians will resist and invaders must die." Wow, that's really interesting. So let's go and watch that. Now, here's the video of that particular thing. So here's the march in Kyiv a week, 2 weeks before the invasion, and they're aware, they understand, right? They're getting it. Like, there is a real threat right across the border, and Putin's saber rattling, and they're saying Ukrainians will resist. Like, they're telling you this is what's going to happen. Ukrainians will resist. Now get that image in your head, and then go back to what I just showed you here. They're activists and diehards, right? Activists and diehards. That's what's going on. I mean, it's really interesting to see the difference between that group and what's going on in Russia with the mentality of the Russians. So I don't think that the Russians are in any way able to mentally cross that bridge in order to get there. But Zelensky at this time, Zelensky is attending police drills in southern Kherson. He said the best friend of our enemies is panic in our country. So he's aware that this could be a problem. He's mentally preparing himself for what's coming down the pike. Okay, so I hope that helps you understand why I make the case that I don't think that the Russians are going to rise up and overthrow Putin. The oligarchs might have some say in that, but the people of Russia, they're just not prepared. They're just not mentally capable, I think, of being able to cross that bridge. And so that's where we are. If this video was helpful to you, would you please consider giving me a like or a thumbs up or leaving me a comment? Engage in dialogue. I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. If you want to support me, you can buy me a cup of coffee, and I thank you to the dozen or so of you that have already done that. And if you want to support Ukraine in a fun way, you can buy the complete collection of Vladimir Putin's Truth About Ukraine, which turns out to be a blank gag book, and the entire proceeds from this, for every $2.99 book, roughly $2, that's the proceeds from it, will be donated to Ukrainian relief, and that's just one way of supporting a cause. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine. See you tomorrow.